Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book, this being a show where it's about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Resident Alien. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I love there's a whole situation with, Harry. Like, it's like, oh man, like, who's this pulling up on him? There was a part of my mind that was thinking it was Isabel. I was like, nah, it can't be. Oh, lo and behold, it turns out it actually is Isabel. She had followed him because apparently she had faked getting knocked out because she found the sleeping pills. I was like, oh, a situation I was expecting. But obviously for Harry, he knows they're being watched because I guess he's like, my ship is missing, so whoever took it most likely is still around here, or maybe he's able to get a sense. And I love that he's playing it up so terribly. He's acting, but he's like, yeah, I came here because I needed space from you, my wife, and I just love here collecting dirt or something like that. Like, he was making up the lamest excuse, and everyone listening is like, whatever, because I love the lady's like, yeah, take him. But it's like, no. Dude's like, no, just hold down. Let's wait. Let's let this play out. But then, like, Isabel gets so pissed. He's like, oh, come back. We can work this out. God, he was quoting something. Like, basically, it was like, I'm blanking on what he was saying. But it was just like, it was a quote for something. It was like a movie or something I think he was quoting specifically. And he just kind of gets to leave. And I love, it's like, okay, well, what do we do now? And lady's like, oh, go ahead and take him out. And dude's like, no, ignore that order. And he's like, there's actually something seriously wrong with you. It's like, we don't even have to kill him. And you're like, kill him anyway. It's like, you're a little too kill happy. I even love he brings it up to the general lady. It's like, see what I mean? Kind of weird and crazy, right? Like, the general doesn't say anything because I guess she gets results now. But it's like, come on, she's a little too damn bloodthirsty. Like, come on, she just snapped that dude's neck for nothing who wrote the book. And it's like, didn't even need to do all that. Could have just like knocked him out, but I guess like that would have drawn too much attention. But it's like killing him like that, making it seem like a robbery, whatever. So Harry goes back home afterwards, though. Now he knows that people are aware of him, are hunting him because they've stolen his ship now. But when he goes back and it's like Isabel's leaving, he's like, oh. And I love that he's like, well, I've got to try to make her stay. And he says, stay. And she's like, no. He's like, damn, that didn't work. It was like, that's all the effort you had. But I thought it was interesting because for him, it's like, I want you to stay. He's like, so I got a question for you. What are you cooking for dinner? He just wanted to know. He's like, oh, that tiny chicken thing you do. Like, oh, come on. He's like, I need you to stay. I'm hungry. That's all he cares about. And even at the end, she's like, I just want you to answer me one question. Did you ever love me? And he was like, once. And the sad thing is, if this was the real Harry, who knows what the end result could have been at the end of the day. Maybe the real Harry and Isabel could have worked things out. Maybe not. It's actually just sad because like she'll never know the truth about her husband. But you can see that Harry is kind of heartbroken by it. And obviously because I think for him it's just a lot of things stacked on top of each other, like all these human emotions that he's not giving too much thought to. Like, oh, her leaving was actually heartbreaking because he grabbed his chest because it actually broke his heart. Because regardless of him trying to get rid of her, he enjoyed her company. He liked being around her. Because let's not forget, Harry lost a wife. I mean, we don't know the circumstances, but she did really die. So for him, it's like, it probably felt good to have someone else's company all that time. So yeah, he was trying to get rid of her at first, but I think having someone else around, someone to kind of, have sex with and this and that, I think it felt good. But also, like, he's kind of lost his purpose because, he's kind of angry about that, but also he feels like a failure on every other front because he doesn't get to be the town doctor anymore because Ethan's doing that. And also, he couldn't find his device. His ship was stolen from him. Just he's kind of, in his mind, a failure on all fronts. Hell, even to the point to compensate with it, took a whole bunch of pills and drank, and ended up dreaming about the dead Harry being like, oh, because he was like, oh, can you cook me? Because he's cooking steak or something. He's like, oh, because I was hungry. He's like, do you want one? He's like, can I get one? He's like, if you say please. And he said, please. And he's like, no. Because the real Harry's pissed because it's like, not only did you steal my life, my wife, my house, like, you ruined everything. And he's like, worse than a loser, the worst thing you're worse than a loser. You're human. He was like, that's the most horrible thing anyone's ever said to me. And proceeded to call him something else. He was like, oh, no, that's actually the worst thing anyone's ever called me. And ended up being kind of almost like a Freddy Krueger thing of like slicing his throat, and they're just like, oh, still dreaming, and, popping away too. And I love that his only words at the end of it is, what an asshole. And it's like, yeah, the asshole who you killed, stole his life, stole his wife, stole his house. Yeah, he's the asshole. But it's like, come on, I know I did all that, but what an asshole. You don't have to be a dick about it, right? Yeah, it was just interesting. Because I still, obviously, Harry's still kind of a little blissfully unaware of just kind of, obviously, he's growing a little too much. He is becoming a lot more human than he's kind of giving himself credit for. I even love the, like, the montage of him doing different jobs, doing the paper. Ironically, that's what Max does. But also, like, what was it? Working at a coffee shop or whatever, as like a barista, and then, like, a tattoo artist, and he tattoos like Jerry Orbach's face on Darcy's arm. And she's like, I've been waiting my own entire life for this. It's like, yeah, I love Jerry Orbach too, and it's just like Darcy's crying at just how beautiful it is. I'm like, I also love that in that his head shaved. He's got all these freaking tattoos. During the barista thing, he had like kind of like, I guess he's supposed to be a little hippie-ish, so he has like a beard and stuff. Which also, speaking of beard, I love that that's a gag in this. It's like, he's like, I would create a disguise to I would put on a mustache as a disguise, but he's like, the only people who do that are firefighters or pedophiles. And then later on, he puts it on, which is, it's so interesting for him to look like his alien self because he's around Max and he's got the glasses and a mustache on. And he's like, oh, I'm a firefighter. He's like, get rid of that because one of our teachers got fired because of that, looking like that. I was like, oh, that's a super dark joke, dude. And callback, actually. I like that. It's just like, but also it's like, it makes that even sadder because it's like, oh, ugh, that's a super dark joke, dude. But nevertheless, so things were kind of interesting on that front with Harry. Obviously, like he's dealing with a lot of stuff, to the point that he's at the bowling alley playing on the entire time because like Judy had called up Darcy and they show up, and I love that like Judy and all that whole thing, which I also love. It's like, oh yeah. It's like, yeah, I think he got a PTSD. And then Darcy's like, is that stuff you use to clean the shoes? Is it a little toxic? And she's like, yeah, a little bit. And it's like, they're looking like, oh, Judy, you poor dear. It's like, oh. And so it's like, hey, and Harry talks about everything that's kind of going down. It's like, well, Isabel left me. I lost my job. I'm kind of a loser. Just kind of failed at everything. And in that moment, it's like, yeah, he's like, even pills and drinking didn't help. It's like, yo, that's not going to help. Judy, bring out the weed. And it's like, they're going to get high. And that was interesting, him getting high for the first time. But what's interesting is, I think even though she was kind of high at the time, I think Asta is starting to pick up on things and being like, Harry's kind of a bit of a weirdo. Like, what if you find out he's like a sociopath that has like psychopath or, no, I think sociopath is what she said, with like a whole bunch of wives all around the country or whatever. And it's like, she's like, and Darcy's like, wait, I could have been like his patient's wife or something like that. But I love that while they were in the restaurant, Harry comes across a cousin, because what we saw at the beginning, and I really like that interesting thing of like, oh yeah, like humans like to think that the universe is large. It's not. It's actually very tiny. And he says that basically, which I think it showcases certain things, because obviously like we see like a billion years ago, we see like a rock end up, like some stuff ends up colliding, like asteroids or rocks or whatever collide, and then like one lands on a planet 750 million years ago. I guess that was I guess that's the planet Harry's from. And then some 100 years later, like a fragment of that lands on Earth. And obviously kind of through the evolutionary process, we see that basically octopuses are from Harry's species, which it's playing into like a lot of people think octopuses are aliens here on Earth. So, and we get confirmation from that. I should have checked out the credits. I'll check it afterwards. If I don't remember to, someone will probably let me know. This is going to be going up in a couple hours. Oh, recording at the last minute. But if I'm not mistaken, it sounded like that was Nathan Fillion. And if it was, I'm not too surprised. Obviously, Alan and Nathan were in both Firefly and Serenity together, so kind of a reunion in that front. But it sounded like it was Nathan Fillion. It might not have been. I could be completely wrong. But I love that. It's like, oh yeah, like my brother has got like a 6-pack like wrapped around his ass, but oh, here you are getting baked. It's like you kind of basically telling him not to give up, that he still got to focus on the mission. But I also love when Harry like runs off. He's like, whoa, actually break me out of here. Damn it, I should have started a conversation like that. Luckily, Harry wasn't talking out loud. He was talking inside of his head, telepathically and stuff like that. Makes you wonder, is there any more of their people still out? I'd assume, if they hadn't been eaten already. Because it's like, oh, the bad news is I failed a mission, I lost my ship, and don't have my device. Good news is my friends didn't order octopus, So there's that. And obviously, he had read, like, Harry ran into Max earlier in the episode, and there was a whole conversation about Max was like upset because it's like, wait, you didn't fix that thing with my parents to not send me away. And for him, it's like, actually, I kind of leaned in and told him that you basically should spend like a lifetime there or something. He's like, that you need like a lifetime of like psychiatric help or something like that. And it's like, for him, he doesn't care. He has business to attend to. And I didn't think much of it at the time when Max was like, oh, you got alien stuff behind in your car, in the back of your truck, which even Harry brings it up later on. He's like, how did you know I had alien stuff in it? He's like, it was covered up. And I was like, it's not, I mean, even if it's covered up, I was like, that's not too much of a thing. But then I'm like, yeah, it didn't correlate in my head. He's like, yeah, because it was glowing green. And it's like, because of the mutation that lets him see Harry for who he is, he can also see alien related stuff. So it kind of gives off a certain signature. And to him, it looks like a green glow. And I love that how this whole conversation came about is because Harry's just laying in his bed, eating his popcorn, and be like, can you tell your mom to put more popcorn on on her shopping list? What were we talking about? The green glow. All right. And I love that those conversations. I like that they've done that now. It's like now that it is what it is. So like anytime Max is around, Harry's just full blown alien version of himself more often than not. So I just always think that's kind of an interesting choice that they made. And I love that it's like he's like, just get out of here. And it's like I peed in your bed too. I was like, oh, gross, because he was like, breaking in here is easier than breaking into the grocery store. So he's like chomping. It's like, wow. I'm surprised we doesn't like have an adverse reaction on him as an alien, but maybe it's a byproduct of the fact is that, like he's pretending to be human, so he's kind of has a human's genealogy kind of going on. So, but what was really interesting along those terms, it's like, well, Max promised to help if Harry was like, hey, okay, I was wrong, I misdiagnosed your kid. And it's like, obviously Max's mom is super upset because she leaned into it. It's like, this is our decision, this is our final decision, you got to deal with it, Buster. We love you, we're trying to do what's best for you. And for her to kind of have leaned in like that, and turns out, wait, my kid isn't sick, I didn't believe my kid about him not actually being, it's like, obviously Harry justifies it being like, oh, he has a very like overactive imagination, and Dr. Seuss, who isn't a real doctor either. Such a shame. Which obviously Max's mom not too happy about. Like, wait, you misdiagnose my child? Do you know how much of like a wedge you put between me and my husband? And he was like, wait, there's a wedge? That only she really noticed. But I thought that was an interesting aspect because obviously later on he's trying to make her feel better. He's like, no, it's okay. And then she's like, no, like I need someone who challenges me. So tell me I was wrong. And he's like, all right, you were wrong, but it's going to be okay. And she's like, they're cuddling up. And then he took it a step too far because he turned it into like, well, yeah, you can be a little, what was it? Little controlling and stuff. Not a lot, just a little bit. And then he also brings in the fact is that she is very adamant about like the 12 items or less. It's like, oh, you can be a little critical about that. And she kind of walks away and he's like, well, this didn't work, because he was expecting the candle to be very calming and stuff like that. So I thought that was interesting development. I also love that Ethan isn't the biggest help, because obviously Asta comes towards him and it's like, oh, like, don't you think Harry's diagnosis might be kind of wrong? I've known the kid my entire life. And I've known the kid like his entire life, and it's like, oh, it's like, oh, but see, being sent away to a school isn't too bad. I was sent away. He's like, you were? Yeah, I was sent away to a school in Connecticut. Like, because you were sick. Oh, not because I was sick or anything. It was because of lacrosse. And she's like, thanks. That was absolutely no help at all. Yeah, which I thought that was interesting. I mean, it only seems like more often than not, it just seems like he's more so interested in just gloating about himself, because it's like, he was like, oh, doctors make mistakes. And it's like, have you ever made a mistake? And he's like, no, never. So, I don't know. It's going to be interesting. Like I said, we're just getting bite-sized pieces of Ethan. I'm curious to find out more about him. I'm like, maybe we're going to end up finding out he's more of a psychopath or something. I don't know. I'm curious to see what ends up happening. Is he just going to be a bit player in this, or is he going to have like a bigger role going forward, or is there going to be like something going on with him, or is just other than being Harry's replacement? I'm curious. Another angle to this whole episode, too, is a whole thing between Liv and Mike. And I love that whole situation of it's also like they're trying to find out who's responsible, and they're talking to the other nurse at the doctor's office, and she's like, oh yeah, like it had to be Jay. Yeah, the kid's quiet, like she's scheming something. I also love when Austin pops over. She was like, yeah, I was telling them that there's no way Jay would have anything to do with this. I'm like, what? I love the full 180 because you didn't want Jay to know that you were like spreading shit around about that. But I also love it that like Liv is like, I totally understand, because she was like, yeah, there's someone that digs out the fruit from the bottom of every yogurt we have at the police station. She kind of points a finger at Mike. I was like, that's such a specific and weird thing to do. But obviously, eventually, Asta points them in a different direction than Jay, bringing up Jimmy, which they bring Jimmy in to kind of ask him a whole bunch of questions. And it's like, oh, you got caught stealing cookies out your grandma's cookie jar, and so you killed her to basically cover up. He's like, my grandmother died of pneumonia, and didn't. You had Mike being like, well, condolences. But I also love that Liv and Jimmy had a little bit of a moment where he was just like, come on, it's like, you know, he's like, have you ever met, because obviously Liv was kind of being snarky about the fact is he doesn't listen, because obviously when the time came, Mike did exactly what I figured he would. He took credit for all the stuff that Liv is the one that kind of discovered all this stuff last episode, kind of connected a lot of dots. And the mayor runs up to him and is like, oh yeah, like, also love that little, he's like, oh, you're not in the mood for any dancing. Maybe another time. And Austin's just giving him that, like the death stare. But I love that, obviously the mayor was like, oh, congratulations on everything. And Liv was like, yeah, I worked my butt off too. Because it's like, she's not getting any of the credit. Mike is getting all the credit. And even later on being like, oh yeah, we could even be on deadline. She's like, oh, that'd be awesome. It's like, what are you talking about? I'm talking about me and Cletus. It's like, man, she's second fiddle to Cletus. I wouldn't even say second fiddle. She's probably, oh, I mean, the disparity between second and third is very steep. So who knows? Might even put other people before Liv, which is super sad because she's very good at her job. She's really good at her job of noticing stuff that Mike doesn't, because Mike's just too much of a glory hound. That's all he really cares about, because for him, it's just, this murder just adds as an opportunity to prove himself. That's all it is. But getting back to it, Liv and Jimmy bonding over the fact is they have people that don't listen in their lives. Because for him, it's like, oh, my Bert, you know Bert. She's like, yeah, I went to school with Bert, right? You tell him one thing, it's like, yeah, never listens, right? Yeah. And it's like, so they had that commonality. He was almost like, well, glad you have this stroll down shit don't matter lane or something like that. But obviously the person behind this is someone who's methodical, who was waiting for Sam to inject himself with his insulin. So that takes someone who's got proper planning, who's willing to wait things out. But Jimmy, it's like, yeah, he's kind of an idiot, and it's like, oh, no offense. He's like, oh, no, she's like, no offense, but he's like, no, cool. They keep going down the trail you're going, because it proves that I'm not the murderer. But it also turns out he's not the pharmacist. He sold the drug. He sold the prescription pad to someone else. That person has been selling it to kids, which is interesting. Like, even though he's scummy, even he has his lines of like, whoa, it's being sold to kids. I guess it's because, well, his kid's still around, and like, you know, I guess with the whole Jay being in school too, maybe with the most recent circumstances that hit him a little bit different. I don't know. Once again, it doesn't stop him from being a total scumbag, but it's just, once again, it's interesting how what lines certain people are willing to draw in certain aspects. So I just thought that was interesting. But obviously it turns out it's like the janitor at the high school, which Mike is running after and telling him to slow his ass down, and Liv's just, you know, going the other way, going slow and steady, and ended up like tripping him. And it's like, how'd you do that? It's like, this used to be my hunting ground, so like I know the shortcuts and everything. So he's the one behind the prescription pads, but I doubt he's actually the one that killed Sam. I think there's still going to be more to that. Whoever did it, like, because at first it makes it seem like maybe whoever the pharmacist is killed Sam because Sam found out, but I think it's something else. It probably is a lot more of a personal thing, because I think poisoning someone, it's not an impersonal thing, but it is like a personal motive of murder. Like usually, like so whoever it was, there was something between them and Sam. So what that necessarily is, we'll ultimately have to wait and see. But I think there's still some lines that needed to kind of be filled in on that. I mean, what What was really interesting though is obviously like Mike's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder about Liv and being like, oh, like he's super quiet. And she's like, oh, you not talking is rare, so what's up? And he's like, I think you've been disrespectful to me. You know, you try to read the Miranda rights, but that's supposed to be me. Because he's like correcting her all the time, like, oh, like stop saying can't, you need to be more can. Can you be more can and not can't? And then also like when she was like using a contraction like you're instead of you are, like he's so anal about that. And it's like, no, the Miranda rights thing is my thing, and you try to take that from me. You're being disrespectful, me and Cletus, because Cletus is a human being, even if he is in kind of a tiny dog form. And Liv went off on him. It's like, oh, this burger was for Cletus. She grabbed it. I thought she was going to take it for herself. It's like, no, she just punched it and smashed it into the table. It was like, what is wrong with you? She's like, you're the one that's disrespectful. And she ultimately just quit. To be fair, she had every right to, just because it's like Mike does treat her like shit. Let's see how far you get in this investigation without her, because literally Liv has been the only one that's really sussed things out. I mean, he's gotten Dare right on certain regards. He's like, yeah, Harry's a weirdo and stuff like that, but it's like, and he's right to be wary of, but he's like off basis when it comes to the actual crime that he's aware of, and that's this murder with Sam, so... But Liv is the only one that's actually connecting a lot of dots. Obviously, the door handle that ended up coming from Harry's place. So obviously there's connecting dots of like Harry's whole situation, but also to this murder. Like she's the only one that's kind of figuring everything out. And she shouldn't have to deal with Mike's shit. And even him being like, once she stormed out and everything, and her being like, this is too good to go to waste or something like that. And still hitting it as she leaves. And he's like, that's some shit or something like that. It's like, wow. So I'm curious to see how Mike handles things going forward. I doubt he'll make much progress. And if he does, probably going to go down the wrong lane and side of things. And even if he does meet up with Liv, he'll probably try and be like, yeah, I know you really messed up this time, but I'm willing to take you back or something like that. I can see him saying some back assward shit like that. But once again, have to wait and see. I also love that that dude working under the general, isn't he like a colonel or something like that? I think is what Linda Hamilton's character said he was. Essentially, he's the one that figured out what the whole thing is, that basically it's like, oh, Harry's ship, like he ends up bringing up a civilization that got wiped out a long time ago, and they ended up modeling like certain things, even though like air travel didn't really exist back then, yet they were able to kind of design these specific things. And it's like, oh, they must have taken it from alien ships, because looking at one of the particular designs, it looked just like Harry's ship. So, and it was said that maybe aliens wiped out that particular group like 3,000 years ago. So now he's the one that's come up with the theory that the aliens are here to attack, which is also an interesting thing, because like this isn't an ET thing of like, oh, like the government's trying to step in, all this innocent aliens. Like, no, Harry is here to wipe out the entire planet. He is the bad guy under these circumstances, you know? It's just, once again, we get his perspective. It's like, oh, he's fun-loving and joking, but let's not forget he is here to eradicate the human race. Once again, very destroy all humans, which I've never played those games. I saw bits and pieces of people playing them over the years, but I've just never ever played the full entirety of the game. But it's very reminiscent of that, as I brought up in a previous episode, because I remember bringing up like, oh yeah, like I'm surprised I never drew parallels between this and Destroy All Humans. If I'm not mistaken, like Harry's design, it's a little similar to the Destroy All Humans alien species in that. But regardless, so that was kind of a fascinating turn of events. What is also interesting is obviously Harry and Max working together, and lying to Max, being like, oh, it's kind of like a radio is kind of what the device is. Don't want to tell him that, well, he already is weary of you and think you're trying to kill humans, and if you told him you really are trying to kill humans, it kind of sour things. So you need his help, so you're lying to him, being like, oh, he ends up helping Harry end up finding his device, because he can see the green glow in the mountains, but it's a glacier, and he's warning Harry not to go there. Asta and Darcy nearby are like, oh, what's up with that? Whoa, Harry's going to the glacier, why? So they go after him. But we also see this interesting thing where Max has that fragment of Harry's ship, and obviously it's glowing, but it resonates with his ship. And in that moment, it allows the government, the army, for all of them to like pinpoint where it is. So now they know it's in Patience, Colorado. Granted, it's going to lead them directly to Max. So that's definitely going to be interesting, especially if they run into Harry. It's like, whoa. That dude who is here where the alien device was, and the resonance from the ship, like, you know, was, and we just happened to run into him in the area where the ship will, it might start drawing, but they might start thinking they might just think it's Max. Hell, they might even go as far as thinking it might be one of Max's parents, if not both. So that's going to be an interesting development if it turns it. I'm curious when it's all said and done, like if they meet up with Max and he's like, well, there is an alien here. Like once again, and it's something I brought up earlier. Like, is it going to be? I brought it up in like a couple episodes back, wondering, would those storylines connect? Where it's like, will Max sell Harry out, even though they're having a truce? Maybe he won't sell Harry out until they bring up, yeah, this alien is trying to eradicate the human race. It's like, what? Okay, I'll tell you exactly where Harry is. Which currently Harry is in quite the predicament. He found his device, but him and Darcy as well as Asta ended up kind of getting sunk down in between, because it ended up like cracking and caving in, so they're kind of stuck together. So probably going to lead to a lot of interesting conversations last episode about like, what were you doing up here? He's like, oh, I was just collecting snow, is kind of the excuse he was making this episode, having to hide his device that he's kind of finally retrieved and what that necessarily entails. Going to be a lot of it's going to be interesting to see what this next episode is. I think this is going to be a very personal episode, at least in that regards of like Asta, Darcy, and Harry. Like what that would necessarily turn into is going to be interesting in its own right. Because I'm sure for them, it's like, we get it, all that you're going through, your job, Isabel, you're not in a good place. And I think at that time, it's like, oh, it'll probably resonate with Harry. Like, right, maybe this has been bothering me a lot more than I kind of gave it credit for. So we'll see. I think it's going to be really interesting to see where everything ultimately ends up taking us next episode. Kind of stumbled there a little bit, sorry. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.